Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast. We're so excited that you're here. This is going to be a great show. This is a highlight reel of all of our favorite conversations. Well, not even all, but there's so many great moments and conversations and insights from all of our guests, and we try and highlight some of them our favorite. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc and Vassilis, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Okay, try this.
Go.
On the show today, we have a great guest. Actually, two great guests. It's V and Marc.
I love that.
We got ourselves.
It's all we could source, like such a short notice, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Everyone's got their Christmas parties going on. It's just you and I. No, but in all seriousness, we're doing this as a year in review kind of thing. Just highlighting some of our favorite moments from different conversations. And V,
Yeah,
you and I are just chatting about this. It's hard to pick a few of them, like, because they're all so really interesting, I thought.
Not only that, I think it comes down to the fact, like, every podcast not only offered a strong nugget that everyone could take away, there were so many areas that you could really kind of like, in my opinion, at least, you can really take some information from. So as we kind of prep, like, try to do this top 10, I'll be honest, man, like I could have minimum done 10 myself, but for the sense for, well, at least not keeping our listeners there for like hours on end listening to us ramble. I think we've isolated some good nuggets here for everyone. Yeah,
I think so too. So why don't you start with the earlier podcast, one of the early podcasts. Yeah. I think you had Mary Kyriakidi as one of yours.
Yeah, honestly, it's the one that, it's unfortunate that I couldn't be there for that conversation, but there's really some really strong nuggets. And one thing that really stood out to me is like when Mary was talking about like consumers are serial adulterers. Like I think when you think about that in its very like primitive form, I think it shows you that, you know what, you're constantly going to be as a brand or as a service, you're constantly, sorry, let me see what's the right way to put this. Consumers are sleeping around, and it's not just your brand that they're sleeping with. They're sleeping with other brands as well. And you just have to be okay with that. But the important thing is how do you start differentiating yourself or building some of those the mental availability, the mind structures that you need. So at least maybe you're a preferred partner more so than not. But, the reality is we're all in this space trying to what's the right word here? Trying to not sell. I hate that word now. Like I'm thinking about adulterers and selling, and like it's just like this is going.
We're all pimps. Is that what we're saying?
I can see the soundbite now.
No, for me, I get the point, and it's a pretty big mental shift for me as well. Like I think that soundbite is helpful.
Yeah.
Whatever way you get there to explain the point, I think is a helpful and healthy way to view the world. Because in the other world, we used to think that the whole goal of marketing was exclusive loyalty, and that's just not feasible. It's not realistic. It's not possible. And so thinking about it that way, it opens a whole bunch of doors for innovation, because you can then start to say, well, what are customers using us for? When are they using us?
Yeah.
Or when are they considering us? Which categories do they remember us for?
Right.
And that creates a whole bunch of other market expanding or profit expanding opportunities to say, well, if we position our product for this particular category entry point or this category requirement that we can do, we just never thought about, then you start opening up opportunities for the brand instead of thinking, oh, everyone's going to love me and everyone's going to stay with me forever.
You did a way better articulating that than I did. I was just spinning there, but pimps for life. Let's go. So what?
No, it's.
Go ahead. No.
Go for it.
Go
for it.
Well, I was just going to say, so what was your first one that kind of like that stuck out to you?
Well, so this was Chris Walker's actually. There was a few nuggets from him that I thought about. And in one in particular, there's a point in that conversation where we were talking about the difference. I think I was talking about going through a shopping lane, and you go from trigger to purchase right away if you see a chocolate bar and you're hungry, right? Or you get a sweet craving and you just buy. Whereas B2B is different, though there are similar processes and that kind of thing. And he's like, I think they're more the same than they are different. And so for me, that was kind of like, again, a bit of a reset in terms of, I think we often think about segmentation and think about what's different about people all the time.
Yeah.
And then we kind of slice and dice and like hyper segment the market. And so in some ways, because we're trying to think of everybody as being so different, and in some ways we restrict our potential for the company or the brand that we're managing because of over segmenting.
Yeah.
And so rather than thinking about what makes everyone different, think about what makes everyone the same and then start from there for your segmentation process.
Yeah.
So for me, that was just one of those things where I'm like, right. Yeah. You could expand the market potential of your product or the use cases or the jobs to be done just by thinking more about what's the same instead of trying to find everything that's different.
Yeah, and actually, it was you triggered a thought. Now there's a few guests that we actually talked to a little bit about this idea of the over segmentation, the over personalization, and whatnot. And I think at the end of the day, it goes back to some of the. Well, actually, this was one of my nuggets, one of my takeaways. It was going back to, and it was in episode 12 where we were talking to Nicole Hartnett around reach versus frequency. And I think that was a very interesting take, that it's like reach should be, non-negotiable in terms of making sure that you're approaching it through that lens first. And then you're looking at the frequency or some of those, personalized or those different behaviors that we want to do. So, there's diminishing returns when you look at frequency or when you try to do too much frequency and you haven't achieved the right scale and reach. So I loved like when in Chris's conversation where it's like looking at it as like, why do we keep treating B2B different when technically a lot of the same principles apply? Yes, the audience is different. They're probably more qualified or they take a little more time. But when they're qualified, they're qualified. That was a great call there.
Yeah. I guess you said Nicole, but do you have another one that you want to chat about?
We can talk about Roger Martin, just dedicate a whole episode to him. But honestly, we were really, really lucky that we brought him on twice. But I think it was like when I go back to our first podcast with him, which was it was episode 3, strategy.
The Galaxy Quest one.
Exactly. And there was something that he really kind of focused on is like, how do you make sure like organizations build in longevity or are able to kind of withstand the test of time? And he's like, the relentless focus on the consumer, like full stop.
Yeah.
And I thought like, when you think about it in that context, it's like, can't say no to that.
I picked the same one too, actually. Yeah. Because, so much of and the other thing that kind of threads through a lot of these conversations is innovation in a lot of ways, because we were talking about that particular conversation with Roger threaded through to innovation. Because when you talk about, I think the conversation we were having at that point was, why does a company like Kodak invent the digital camera and then kill it or shut it down or just not fund it and support it? And the same thing with like Blockbuster not getting Netflix. And then he brought up a great example with, I think, Tide and how they moved from powder to pods, which wasn't a small shift in investment in terms of their manufacturing capabilities and all that kind of stuff.
Not at all.
So I think for me, that was really fascinating because that stuff is inconvenient, I think is how he was phrasing it. Yeah. And it's a pain to the business, but to the customer, it's just serving their needs better than than before. And so if you keep doing that, to me, my aha was like, yeah, you would just always forget yourself in some ways and just focus on the customer. That provides you with a lot of answers and allows you to keep in front of the customer longer because you're constantly trying to keep in step with them.
Yeah. Actually, from the same podcast, I remember he was even talking around, well, there was a soundbite, disruption is not an equal opportunity event. And he further quantifies that by saying that, disruption usually happens to industries that are not listening to their customers. So he mentioned like fintech, edtech, medtech, all these industries that have, notoriously been one-sided in the approach, that now they're seeing the greatest disruption. And I think, it's the relentless pursuit of the customer is probably the single most important aspect that any one of us as marketers, can kind of do, is make sure that voice of the customer is present at all times internally.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was in that same one where he had that great line or great quote about the people who believe in shareholder value are the exact same people who believe babies are delivered by storks.
Exactly. That has to be like the quote of the year for us. It's fantastic.
It should be. Yeah, it's great.
What else did you have on that
phenomenal
list of yours?
So I would say the next one for me specifically was, let me see, Jennifer Riel. So Roger introduced us to Jennifer, and for me, it's one of the things I keep coming back to since we did that, since I read the book and we did the podcast with her. The idea of like my idea versus your idea. And pick
one,
choose one, because we're going to go forward with one. I love the way that she framed that conversation, and that, in marketing, we have to make lots of decisions. We have to choose. Marketing strategy is about, or any strategy is about choice. You have to choose a path forward, and sometimes you're presented with two different ideas. Right. And you may not like the two different ideas. So one of the bridge building exercises, if you had an idea and I had an idea, is to say, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that idea. Yeah. With the intent from me to say, I need to fall in love with the idea that you've got so that I can see the value and the positive things out of that. Similarly, we talk about my idea. And we go, okay, what are the great things in there? And then you can mesh those two things together. I'm doing all these hand gestures like people are going to see this.
Wait, we do have a YouTube channel now, though, so you can see this.
Oh, so I use it all the time now. I try and force myself to do that thing where you go, tell me more, like give me some more information about that. And I want to know more about that idea. I want to understand it better. I want to fall in love with that idea. And then we can find a way to put them together and take the best elements from this one and the best elements for this one and create a brand new, better choice.
Yeah. It's that, when you think about the impact that can have even culturally inside of an organization, can be incredibly powerful. In one of my previous lives, we had this guiding principle, and a lot of listeners who may remember this when we worked together there, but it was around the notion of disagreeing and committing. And it kind of plays off of this idea. It's like, it's okay to have, opposing thoughts, disagreeing. Yeah. You're essentially building together something bigger. But the moment that we've decided on whatever the strategy or the direction, that we're all committing equally. And it's not like, because you didn't go with my idea, I'm going to try to put as many roadblocks in front of that. It's like, no, I'm genuinely invested right now that this idea that we've come up with together, we're going to put in our all to make sure that this succeeds. And it's a subtle, it doesn't always happen in organizations, but I think it's so important, like a pro list, making sure that you have the right guiding principles that really kind of enable that kind of entrepreneurship in a sense, that essentially breeds innovation. And I know innovation is usually just tied to technology, but it's not just technology.
Totally. What was one of your other ones?
Our conversation with our favorite CFO/CMO/CEO, Dave Bunce. Honestly, like I loved hearing from him. again, because it gave us, we normally talk to a lot of marketers, right? So we always have our own opinions on how things are done. But talking to Dave was a completely eye-opening experience, I would say, because he talked about like ROI and its troubling obsession that we have as marketers. And where, you know, he used, it was two examples, but the one that he really articulated was around Adidas when they stepped away from a lot of the brand marketing initiatives, took away money from some of the sponsorships, and then they just hyper invested it in like performance marketing tactics, ROI driven tactics, if you will.
Yeah.
And obviously there was a diminishing return in that was actually influencing the brand itself. And hearing that coming from someone so close to finance was, for me, like, it's validating, because I'm not to say, like, again, just because we can measure it and we can kind of show some of the opportunities there does not mean that it is the right thing to do, right? And how do we make sure we're still looking at things as holistically as possible, where we're waiting, and, you know, this dovetails into our conversation with Jennifer, where we're talking about like the 60-40 split, right? Like 60% of your budgets could go into a lot of the brand building versus 40% can go in some of to that, you know, the activation, lower funnel tactics. So for me, that conversation, just listening to Dave kind of articulate, like, from a finance perspective, a lot of the nuances and how not to be myopic, but also finding that common language between marketers and finance, and where marketers should be investing a little more time and understanding that space, but also making sure that you're bringing people from finance along the creative journey as well.
Yeah, that, for me, that was a wicked point that he made, was just finding that common language, and for marketers to reach out, extend the olive branch, ask more questions, learn more of the language, take some time to figure that out. Because I think that is really important. I mean, within business, there are lots of different departments, and they all have their own kind of language and culture. And I mean, even just go and look at the TLAs, the 3-letter acronyms that are in each department. Like, you're going to get all kinds of different shortcuts and short forms of everything. And so I think that is important to have that sort of translation, at least, you know, when you're doing presentations, to have that kind of conversation and be able to speak in their language. It's important.
Well, it's probably, I think it breeds that idea of being inclusive, and everyone has a shared objective. At the end of the day, any organization is likely trying to drive revenue, and everyone's pulling in that direction. Okay, well, let's find the commonalities that we can maximize that opportunity through marketing potentially, but we're also realizing what what barriers there exist, even from a finance perspective. I know you and I've been fortunate because we're doing on our EMBA right now. So we got to take accounting and finance classes and whatnot. That's opened up a whole new vernacular for me. Like, I understand things a lot differently than I ever did. And I can probably defend budgets now better than I ever could either.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with that. Speaking of revenue, the one that I would say for me, not to say this is in order in any way, but
we totally
just spinning off of your thread of conversation. Hermann Simon talking about pricing, and specifically the formula that he talked about, where profit equals price times volume minus costs. And for me, that was just like such an enlightening moment, where a lot of like things started connecting and neurons started firing, and I'm like, oh, because even the other day I built a deck, and that was the formula I put on the deck, and I started thinking about all the metrics that we talk about and how they're expressed differently, but in relation to profit, and then the ways you can measure that, and then price and the ways you can measure that, and then so on and so forth, volume and cost. Like, there's lots of different things that we get caught up in, but that underpinning formula is really liberating to have running as sort of software in the back of my head.
Man, I can't say enough about Hermann's podcast, because again, it was not only that, but for me, it was like when he talked about the 3 profit drivers, right? So he talked about, if you increase, what was it? If you increase price by 1%, profit increases by 10, because the profit multiplier was 10. But then if you decrease your cost by 1%, then profit can increase by 6%, which is a profit multiplier of 6. If you increase your volume by 1%, profit can increase by 4% with a profit multiplier of 4. So it shows you that why price becomes so important, but it's often the one that's, I don't want to use the word neglected, but at least from a marketing perspective, it's not one that we spend a lot of time with. If you get price right, it unlocks probably the most for your organization. So I love the way he articulated that. It was just phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about it with him as well about, it's kind of like a forgotten version, the forgotten P of the 4 Ps, like profit, price, product, place, and promotion. So, it is something that I think it's going to be a huge personal focus for me next year, to spend way more time thinking about price than I ever had before. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to drive not even just revenue, it's profit. And so, if you're looking at what levers you have to pull, then you kind of got to go with like, how are we driving? What are we doing to increase a customer's willingness to pay? Which leads to a lot of the other conversations that we had too. And we ended up talking to him about innovation as well. Exactly. So, it's not just it's not just a static thing that you set it and forget it. Like, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement through the price lever.
And it's all intertwined though, right? Like you see how one affects the other. And again, like at the end of the day, it's easy for us to sit here and just keep one lens, the marketing lens, on everything. But the reality is that we would be doing our organizations a disservice if we just thought that way, right? Yeah. And I think, again, when you talk about something like price or the 4 Ps, like, they should all be weighted equally, or they are technically, but they're never approached that way. So how do we make sure then, as marketers, that we are, that we're doing the best and keeping ourselves abreast on all elements of this, especially when you think about strategy.
Yeah, totally. Going back to Roger Martin, there was another part I was listening to where he's talking about how we're having a conversation, but specifically with strategy, it's encompasses so many different business units. And so, to your point about price, it's not just about price. There's a lot of, like, you need product sometimes to be built a certain way so that you can price it a certain way. So there's a lot of opportunity to build bridges. And that's why I love that pro thing. And like, business is just complex, and it's part of what makes it so fun to be in and so fun to explore and learn. And so that was, as I was reviewing a lot of these notes, that was the one thing I was thinking about. I'm like, man, there's just so much to learn.
There's so much to learn. And I think that gives us even more fuel for next year as we continue to build out what our calendar looks like, because I think there's areas that we can probably start spending more time that will help inform how, as marketers, we practice, but more importantly, how we become probably even invaluable, if you will, to our organizations. Yeah. Because we've essentially understood like the end-to-end spectrum, which I think we just like to play in the area that we know. And it's probably not the best.
Yeah, totally. I would say, like, to the listener, dear listener, you listening, on that note, like, if you have any thoughts about things we should look at and want us to, or guests you want us to reach out to, like, please don't hesitate to ask, because like, this is as much for us we're hoping as it is for you. But yeah, and we've had some, like, as you mentioned earlier, V, like, some great success in terms of, like, been really lucky getting some amazing guests, and we're grateful for all their insights and opportunity. But yeah, there's just a lot to stitch together and a lot of things to figure out.
There's so much. And I think that's why we've kind of, if anyone else has noticed, but we've kind of renamed this to Sleeping Barber, a marketing and business podcast, because we're seeing that they go hand in hand a lot more than just being isolated in one discipline. So I think, again, at the end of the day, our goal is here to make sure that everyone feels not only comfortable in the discipline that they operate in, but knowing how they affect either upstream or downstream a lot of the other decisions that are happening in organizations. So yeah, man, like this is, it's been great. It's been great.
Yeah. Any other ones that you want to
There's a couple,
chat about?
Just a couple quick ones. So one was like with Sandeep. So we got into the branding between the ears, the cognitive science behind branding and in that sense. And I thought what was enlightening about that conversation was not only that we, you know, as the discipline matures, the science matures, like we're starting to find the like correlative behaviors that we can manipulate, but then it's the ethics that start coming into play. So it's like, how do we make sure as marketers we're always on the right side of this and not on the wrong side from an ethics perspective? So I thought that was not only that was a great conversation, but it's a great reminder that we have a sense of duty towards, yes, of course, the organization, but at the end of the day, consumers. And we shouldn't be trying to manipulate. We shouldn't be trying to use a lot of the tools, the things that we have in our access to, you know, what potentially paint our organizations in a bad light, but also at the very least from an ethics perspective, we're being very, very conscious of that. So that was for me one item that I thought really stood out.
And kind of thinking about like so much to learn, and like we've had, as we talked about before, like Nicole Hartnett on there, also another one. But I put the whole thing on the list of like
I was just
entire. Oh my gosh, it was like so much to absorb. But whatever way we talk about it, one thing I would say about Sandeep's is that he had a different language. For me, that was interesting, and not to say it was wrong. It was just different from how I was thinking of it. So again, I loved my thinking being challenged with the way he was thinking about it. And it created a whole bunch of new opportunities for me to like just absorb things and think about things differently. And then, you know, in day-to-day world, like the way I talk about marketing isn't the same way as like, you know, we talked about the CFO, but you know, the director of operations, the VP of product development, like we're not all talking about marketing the same way. So, you know, everybody does have their own way of saying things, and, you know, thinking about Nicole's language and how she's doing things and then how Sandeep is doing things. I think the more we understand all these points of view, the more comfortable we feel and less defensive we feel about this is my way. You know what I mean? Oh,
totally. Yeah. I think that's a great call out. Like, yeah, like you're right. Sandeep used different language than maybe what you and I have been used to, but at the same time, like it did go ahead and portray a valid point, and not only in some of the research that he had done himself, but it's, you know, again, we have to make sure that we maintain an open mind and just really be sponges and absorb a lot of this. And then at the end of the day, we each make our own decisions anyways. So.
Speaking of which, with Jon and Orlando, one thing I would want to point out there for me, like the visual of broad beam advertising is so, I don't know why that stuck out for me so much, but that idea of like, you know, us being, and again, I'm hand gestures. So I'm cupping my hands around my eyes in case you can't see this.
Like a binocular.
They're blinders, like horse blinders. Oh, yeah. Yeah, or binoculars, sure. But I was thinking, but that would be like the narrow beam. And so we kind of get super fixated on that thing, like ROIs right there. I'm going to make an ad that's going to get me more ROI, as opposed to the broad beam type of ad that's there to attract and connect with and communicate with all the other people that aren't buying right now. You know what I mean? And I think there's such a huge opportunity to think about creative that way. And as we talked about with those guys, like creative is a huge opportunity to improve, and you can run both the narrow beam stuff and the broad beam stuff. And we shouldn't over depend on one or the other. They have to have a balance.
Oh man. Like Jon and Orlando's pod was also another great one where, you know, first of all, like they were just so upfront with a lot of the information that they shared, which was just phenomenal. But like the 2 books that, Orlando's authored, everyone listening, take some time and spend some time with those books. Like it is that good, and really kind of shows you as from a creative perspective, how creative has evolved obviously through the decades, but also like what we could be doing a lot differently to make sure that we are creating that stickiness that is needed from a creative perspective, which actually now brings me back to a conversation that we had with Jon Mowatt around video, right? And like him pulling back that curtain around, and that was another phenomenal book where he covered everything from strategy to the right equipment that you needed. But really, like what it all comes down to is like how you creating some of that emotional attachment in the ads that you create, and always to make sure that you're building for the platform, not to the platform. I think that's how he said it, if I remember correctly. Where it's like, make sure you're really thinking about that platform and how content is being absorbed and being ingested, versus just like retrofitting something that right now works on TV and trying to just to resize it and throwing it on there.
Yeah, and linking that to, this is just, we're going through everything.
Honestly,
there's so many good things.
Season 1's been amazing, everybody. Just listen to it all.
It has. Because I was thinking about like Faisal and Ian, and then even Ty, like creative for a small. It doesn't have to be just giant budgets that do this. And then with Ty talking about it with like performance branding, it doesn't just, it's not just about like performance advertising, meaning that ROI narrow beam stuff, but you can do it on bigger, small brands and have performance optimize, like brand advertising optimized for performance.
Exactly.
There's just so many cool things there.
Well, I know our most recent one was with Tom, and that was great. Like, what I loved most about that one was really challenging a lot of the things that we've just become accustomed to accepting, right? Think about a lot of those marketing trends, like everyone to go make sure you're investing in, the metaverse, or you're learning about it, or you're trying to find ways. It's like, but if you have that $300,000 that you want to invest in the metaverse, where you could probably maybe staff more people from a customer service perspective, long-term, helping people out will probably take you further than understanding what the metaverse looks like, right? So for me, it was really refreshing in that. And what I love was one of his examples when we were really kind of like asking him like, hey, what is like some of those digital transformation or a great case study? And he brought up McDonald's. And when he said that, I'm like, McDonald's, what are you talking about? But he articulated like just like the idea of bringing those screens into the store. And you think about the amount
ordering kiosks,
those ordering kiosks, and how much had to happen internally to get everybody on board. The real estate department, right? And how are you making sure that you're investing in these screens to be there? How is it affecting, productivity? How does your back or frontline staff versus your back? Like, if you think about how convoluted or how difficult bringing that to life probably was for McDonald's, and no one's going to talk about it. That is a case study that I would love to read.
Totally. Yeah, he had another one about when we're talking about, wanting to do something with innovation and doing something radically different. A company like an airline or a restaurant company or something that's got an established footprint. Or like a cab company, probably not the right thing to just blow up the whole thing and then start from scratch all over again. But to take, say 5 locations and create something brand new that has some of the same DNA. It's almost like it's a kid. Yeah. But it looks different. It feels different. It behaves different. And it is testing some of the assumptions that you think are in step with the current market demand. I just love that idea, and he said it way better than I could. But that idea of like having offspring instead of trying to duplicate what you do and be the same, having kids that are like you, but not necessarily the exact same as you.
No, I think that again, that's a fantastic point, because if you think about like, well, let's look at like, Uber versus like the cabs and whatnot, but like maybe it wasn't the cabs themselves trying to emulate Uber, but it's like, how do you create something that lives outside of your organization, that isn't influenced by the same decision-making processes, that isn't influenced by the same, strategies, that they can operate almost like in isolation and really kind of be, if we borrow like, what Roger was selling us, like that relentless pursuit to be consumer, focused. Like, I think that becomes like a way to really empower a group or an idea to kind of live outside of like what is potentially, conformity within a current structure of an organization. The reality is, if you think about any organization you walk into net new, you're going to come in with some of these big ideas because you haven't been influenced by anything internally yet.
Yeah.
What is that time period? Is that a 6-month period where you have like that phase where you're still thinking outside of what is probably normally acceptable? But then after that 6-month period, then all of a sudden you start becoming just like start thinking the way the organization thinks. I think it's 6 months. I'll try to dig it up. I remember someone doing a study on that.
Well, I mean, it also kind of, I do think there's opportunity no matter how long you've been with the company. And, let's do it. Let's close off. Let's cover all of the guests. Because that's one of the things we talked about, Dan, was in terms of building a marketing career, is just always learning.
Yeah.
And so, finding the things that are, the status quo and just asking, why do we do it that way? It was one of the things, and just being curious about it. I think with that idea, you can find opportunities for new things to do, new things to try, and remain relevant.
Yeah.
And build some of that competitive advantage or cumulative advantage that we talked about with Roger too, where you're just constantly improving because you're constantly learning and serving the customer better than what the competitors are doing.
Yeah. It's a great point. Dan's comment. Yeah, that was a great conversation as well.
Yeah. So many things, V. We were so lucky.
We were like, again, season 1 has been for me, and then if we base it on the numbers as well, has been a great year for us.
Yeah.
And you talked about the guests that came on this year. Obviously, super appreciative of everyone that spent time with us and really kind of shared their tidbits and their knowledge, and we're just so open to do so. And I think we'll be forever grateful for that. But I think more importantly is like what I've loved the most is even the engagement that you and I have received from listeners, and the way they're engaging with the content. And I think for us, it's more of how do we keep bringing some of these stories to life that can help not only marketers, but also like helping those that don't live and breathe our discipline, at least understand it a little bit better than what they previously do. So, man, it's been such a great ride this year.
It really has. I agree.
Season 1.
It's been okay chatting with you too.
Yeah,
like I don't
bad.
mind that.
You're not too bad. Good thing we're doing this virtually. No, I'm just kidding. We should think about doing like an in-person session. We'll open it up to everybody, do a live session.
Yeah. Yeah, we should try that out.
Yeah.
We can do that with this software. We should we should like set a time and just invite people. Again, dear listener, if you are interested, just let us know, because we'll try that out and we'll invite a few people.
Yeah, it's this has been as much as a learning experience for us, and I think if you listen to the first episode versus the last one for the year, you've probably seen an evolution, if you will, a maturation as we're getting more comfortable in this. But I think more and more, it's just. There's a great library of information that anyone can kind of has access to, with a lot of the really important topics that a lot of us are faced with from a day-to-day perspective.
One thing we should talk about real quick, because we haven't done that yet, is why the name Sleeping Barber? Because somebody else asked that. I can't remember who that was that said, "What?"
Well, I think you're the best to answer that.
Well, we should make it our own, and both of us. I'll start, and you can fill in the blanks of what it means to you. But just because I think that's valuable, because part of what this is for me is like you mentioned, this is a library. I really want this to be a great library that has a certain timelessness to it. Because I don't want to chase the trends. I don't want to do the things that like, oh, do this, and oh, what do this, oh, do that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's fundamentals that are just missed by chasing the trend, which is part of the reason why we brought Tom on and picked the customer or the guest that we had. So anyway, the Sleeping Barber story, a bunch of years ago, I had started a company, and it was consulting business, and I was trying to find a name, that was easy to spell and easy to remember and had some kind of visual thing with it that was unique and different. And so I literally spent months and months trying to find a name. And then flipping through a dictionary, lo and behold, there's this thing I find called Sleeping Barber. And it turns out it's a computer science problem. Yeah. And the story is there's for the computer, I think it's actually a computer science problem they hand over to people and they have to try and solve for it in programming. So there's a barber in one room, and he can sleep or eat, or she can sleep or eat. And then in a separate room, there's a customer waiting room, and there's a certain number of chairs. And so the barber has to sleep at the right time. And sorry, did I say sleep or eat? Sleep or cut hair?
It's okay.
Yeah, he can either cut hair or he can sleep. Yeah. And so he has to cut hair at the right time, meaning there's customers in those chairs, and he has to be cutting hair at that time and not sleeping, so that he provides the best customer service and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I just like the analogy because at the time when I was like, this is 15 years ago, probably, I thought there was a lot of opportunity to create more value for a company and marketing in general. If we bridge the gaps between silos and start talking to one another more often.
Yeah.
And so I just like the analogy of that, in that, trying to solve business problems isn't about just sticking in your own lane. It's about trying to understand the problem overall, and then applying the discipline or applying a solution from within your discipline. That's the best solution you can. So that was the gist behind that.
Yeah. And honestly, when we were going through the process of, what do we call ourselves? What are we going to do? For us, for me, at least, what resonated not only was the analogy, because I think it's perfect when you think about it in the context of business. Like, it's so many moving parts. How do you make sure that there is that alignment? You're breaking down those silos, but there's also something about it that it's kind of unique, like a sleeping barber. It's but it doesn't naturally, like, it's like two words that naturally you wouldn't expect to kind of live together. And I think that uniqueness is also kind of metaphoric, if you will, of like both you and I, in the way that we've approached marketing, because I think we're naturally very, we question everything. We're probably a pain in the ass for a lot of our leaders.
100% accurate.
And so I think for me, it's really kind of thinking about like how we can kind of like carve out our little space here and continue to build this library of great guests, great content, and apply a lot of the stuff that we're learning from a day-to-day perspective. And, hopefully our listeners are, and again, like it's seeming that it is resonating, that, you can kind of come along this journey with us as we continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I'm looking forward to next year for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of the things is because you and I are going to be done school next year. So
Jesus,
after that, we'll have more time to focus on this. And I already we're getting ideas about how to make this better for next year, but I'm really excited about building on what we've done, and then thinking about like all the stuff that we've done at school and applying that, and then being able to put the school stuff behind us for now. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I can almost taste it being done. Like it's almost there. Almost there.
Yeah.
We're almost there. It's just, again, I talked about it earlier, but we are building out a YouTube presence as well. Right now, we're basically loading a lot of our audio form of the podcast we've done. We will be playing a lot more with video moving forward. So we'll probably start uploading our video content as well, instead of just it being on audio form. but we're excited to do so and kind of give you guys, give everybody, I guess a different way to engage with us on another platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's great.
It's awesome.
Yeah, man.
V,
happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Yeah. What's our official sign off?
Well, we can't just yell post pod right now because we can't post pod something we just talked about.
How'd you think we did?
We could.
We were a great guest, don't you think?
They're going to bring us on again. No.
Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah, well, I think we should.
Yeah.
How do we sign off? I know we've done.
I think we're just
going to say, okay, bye-bye now.
Yeah. Well, we can say adieu.
I think that's it. I think that's it. See you in the new year, buddy.
All right, man. Adios.
Adieu. I was like, what? Now you're just flipping the script on
Now
me?
I'm changing language.
You see what it's like working with this guy? All right, buddy. You be good.
All right. See you, B.